My name's Andy Anderson. I'm the assistant professor at VCU. A little bit of background for me. I was a high school physics teacher. I'm recovering as a high school physics teacher. I'm doing my best every day to get through that. I love teaching. I still love teaching. I do a little bit of research, but teaching is my first love, and it's what I want to do until they tell me I'm just too old to do it anymore. Excuse me. My bachelor's is in physics. I got it from the University of Richmond. And from the time I took biology in the 10th grade, I hated it. I hated it in undergrad. I swore to myself I would never do anything that was based in biology. It was always going to be physics. It was always going to be math. I didn't even tolerate chemistry. I thought all of that had nothing that I would ever find attractive. I was a high school physics teacher. I did that for 4 years. And just through the stroke of luck and how you end up in things in this world, I ended up having a roommate that was a medical student. For some reason, I started asking questions about medicine. And apparently they got incessant to the point where he asked me, he said, you should just go to medical school. And I said, I don't want to go to medical school. Medical school is all about biology. I don't really like biology and any of that stuff whatsoever. But what happened was I saw at VCU had a program in biomedical engineering. And I thought that that kind of cut the difference between the biology that I didn't like, but it allowed me to ask some of these questions about medicine, and it fit right into my physics wheelhouse. And I started a program in biomedical engineering, and I got in and I left teaching. And the first course that you had to take in biomedical engineering was physiology. I was terrified. It's like, oh my God, it's biology. This is going to be horrible. But I sat down and it showed me the body as a machine, and I was instantly hooked. And after I finished up a master's in biomedical engineering, I flipped over to a physiology PhD, and the course that hooked me to physiology is the one that I run right now and taught in this morning, 20 some years later. So I love physiology. I think it's fantastic. I tend to try to make fun, or at least poke a little bit of fun at the anatomists, because I always say that they just come up with names for stuff, and we come up to explain what those things do after they've been named. But what's more appropriate, I think, is to say that the anatomy is telling you where things are happening, and physiology is telling you what's happening there. And to look at physiology as a way of explaining the body and explaining how it works from a mechanistic standpoint is something that I try to get through my teaching all the time. And the research that I do helps me understand that better. What I do find about physiology that's a little bit interesting in terms of it gave me more of what I was looking for instead of the biology that always frustrated me. I never found a lot of germane things that excited me in terms of talking about photosynthesis or this or that or the cell cycle. But physiology allowed me just to know just enough stuff in a bunch of different fields. And I found that physiology is where they came together. I tell my students every day that there are no physiology facts. What there are is there are biochemistry facts. There are anatomy facts. There are pharmacology facts. And there are all these different facts about all these little bits and pieces of the sciences around health and around biology. But it's physiology where they all come together. It's physiology where you learn how all of these things work and the processes that keep you alive. And I thought that that was just fascinating. And I had a professor once tell me that physiology is the study of what stops happening when you die, which I thought was kind of interesting too. And it's a fight against entropy, as all life is, which brings back the physics right back into me. So I love all of that. I do find the fact that it's a way of thinking. It's a way of synthetically bringing all of this information together. And in doing that, it's also the story of how all of this stuff is supposed to work. And if you don't know how it's supposed to work, then how in the world can a clinician like Katie be able to tell you how it's broken? And if you don't know how it works, or you can't recognize how it's broken, how in the world are you supposed to be able to fix it? So I've worked with advanced practice nurses. I've taught medical students, and I always try to get that across first. We have to know how it works, and we have to know the sort of organic way that all of these different facts come together and bring us this sort of story of doing everything that we want to do. What else do I want to offer there? I want to talk a little bit about my research, but even though we talk about physiology and we say it's this grand place where all these things come together, all these little bits and pieces, in fact, the research is never that grand anymore. You know, the research is pure reductionism. The big ideas in physiology, the big parts of this to understand how this works and that works, we pretty much have ironed out and has been known for some time. Now we're really drilling down into little tiny pieces of understanding this and that, but it's going to pay off because understanding those little details of how this and that works is going to allow for different treatments to come up, down different drugs to be developed, and allow those clinicians like Katie to help these people, in this case, the children that she works with, get over some conditions that they may have. That being said, I wanted to talk a little bit about just the physiology around the research that I have. I'm not going to get down onto it too much. If anybody wants to talk more about it, I'm happy to dork out on this as long as you possibly want me to or can conceivably tolerate. But right now, I'm just going to say my research is in gut. It's in gut muscle. And some of the stuff I'm talking about could be easily translated to the urology work that Katie does with her patients. So I'm just going to sort of throw up a screen there. I got 3 slides. It's not going to take long. I'm going to teach you a little bit about gut physiology, or at least as much as I know. If you want to know anything more beyond that, I'm happy to offer that. So layers of the gut. If you think about the gut as a tube, and a tube that runs from one end to the next, it's a tube that has several layers in it. And the inner part of that layer is the part that interacts with the food that you eat and the waste that you discharge. And it's sort of the business part of that. It's where absorption happens. It's where you draw nutrients out. It's where you release stuff into the food to help you digest it. And we're learning day after day after day that the ability to taste, the ability to recognize the chemical compound in something that you eat didn't stop in your mouth. We're tasting stuff in our stomach. We're tasting stuff in our intestines because we need that information to help modify our digestive process so we can do it best. Depending on what we eat is going to tell us what we need to do to that food along the way. Comfort food really has a meaning beyond that which just tastes good. You eat something that's comfort food and it feels good the entire time it's in your belly. It's because you're continuing to taste it. Your body is looking at it. It's like, I need to work this food this way. Now that comes down to the muscle in this layer. And there's 2 layers of muscle. In the stomach, there's 3. But in the small intestine and large intestine, there are 2 basic layers of muscle, and they mean everything. Because the concept of motility, or how quickly we move stuff through the gut, is going to dictate everything we can do to it. If it's going through too quick, we're not going to be able to absorb it well. If it's going through too slow, we're not going to be able to move it through well. So it's going to be a coordination of these 2 muscle layers. The one that's closest to the food is the circular muscle layer. And the one that's furthest away from the food, closest to the outside of the tube, is the longitudinal muscle layer. And both of them have the ability to contract. Circular muscle layer is arranged around the tube like a circle. And when it contracts, it squeezes and it closes the tube. It makes it narrower. Longitudinal muscle layer runs the length of the tube, and in pieces, it can contract. When it contracts, it pulls the tube open, like an inchworm. So you got one that's closing it and one that's opening it up. And you got both of them everywhere. And yet there's some way that we can move food along in a coordinated fashion. And it's the coordination that I'm trying to figure out. And it's the coordination that everybody's trying to figure out, because when the coordination isn't there, people simply aren't happy with their digestion. So there's a law of the intestine that says that these 2 muscle layers should never be doing the same thing at the same time. Wherever the longitudinal muscle layer is contracting, the circular muscle layer needs to be relaxing. And wherever the circular muscle layer is contracting, the longitudinal muscle layer needs to be relaxing. And the coordinated action of those 2 allows for the movement of stuff down this tube. You open up the tube in front of you, you squeeze the food behind, and it has a place to go. The food kind of falls forward all the way through the tube. And how quickly that happens allows you to mix it up correctly, to add the enzymes necessary to digest it, to do all of those things that you need to do. And when I'm looking at this, or I'm trying to figure this out, or I'm teaching it, I'm constantly thinking about all those little bits, little bit of anatomy here that's important, the layers of the tube, the little bit of biochemistry here, the action of the enzymes, a little bit of pharmacology here, how the nerves are talking to everything. But it's this coordination of these 2 things that's critically important in moving things along. There are nerves that are telling both of them to go, but how in the world does this nerve, or this collection of nerves, know to tell that layer to relax at this point, while the layer just inside of it needs to contract at that point? Now, when the coordination is there, it works great. But for a larger and larger group of people moving forward, it doesn't work so great anymore. And a lack of coordination leads to all kinds of upset, malabsorption if things are moving too fast, irritable bowel syndrome. Even inflammatory bowel disease can result from the fact that this motility has been compromised. Things aren't moving along as well. And let's be honest, just the lack of digestive enjoyment, the lack of appreciating a good meal is completely hinged upon, is it moving through you correctly? So how do you control these muscles? And how did I do the experiment to look into this? I'm not the first to do it. Lots of people have done it, but there's always little bits and pieces to figure out. So what I would do is I would have a one-way conversation with a rat every morning. And from that rat, I would borrow and not return its colon. I would cut strips of that colon up, and I would hang them on force transducers. Right up my alley was a physics guy. And I could see how hard that little piece of muscle was actually alive still. I could keep it alive. And I could see how much that little muscle was pulling. And this technique is done all over. This technique is done with gut muscle. It can be done with uterine muscle. It can be done with bladder muscle. And it's just a way of taking the little bit, the little functional unit of whatever we're talking about and being able to measure its activity, measure what it's doing, measuring its ability to be alive. But as far as muscle is concerned, and not skeletal muscle, but this is smooth muscle, don't worry about the biochemistry here because I don't know much of it either. I know just enough to be dangerous. All smooth muscle is regulated by what's known as the phosphorylation state of its myosin. Myosin is one of the proteins, and if you phosphorylate it, you turn it on. And there's two sort of enzymes that work at that, and there's about 300,000 things that get in the way of this, or you should say help modulate this. And whether it's a bladder, or whether it's a uterus, or whether it's smooth muscle, or even whether it's heart, all of these different things can contribute to the overall contractile state. My experimentation would take some of these strips and try to see what kind of intermediates or what kinds of drugs or what kinds of agents could get in here and affect this. And it was great because you could see it happen. You have a strip there and it was just living physiology happening. It wasn't something, and a lot of the physiology these days, or a lot of the work that's done is done purely molecularly. You grind stuff up, you do these biochemistry tests, and those are great, and they tell us lots of stuff. But this was a living piece of tissue that I was watching do its thing. And I could put an agent on it, and I could see it contract. And then I could put something else on it, and I could see it not contract so much. And over time, and a lot of time, and a lot of pain, and a lot of squinting, and a lot of late nights, I could figure out the things that were involved to make it contract more and the things to make it contract less. Now, the hope of that would be that one day somebody could come up with a drug or use one of those compounds that I used to help someone that has trouble with that coordination that we mentioned here by manipulating one of those layers versus the other. Because what I found is that the control of those two layers was different. And it allowed me to use little bits and pieces of information for everything. And it allowed me to use my physics background to appreciate it from force and all of that, and finally to embrace some biology in my world. And hopefully that kind of physiology, that kind of manner of thinking, that kind of embracing the functional aspect of things is something that the clinician can take when they're seeing it in a patient and appreciating what's going right and possibly what's going wrong.
If Andy figured out the answer to his research, does that change kind of like what you do?
Well, yeah. I mean, if I came up with a good if I had figured out everything that I wanted to figure out, first off, I would mention it in every lecture that I taught, regardless of what the lecture was about. Successful research breeds more successful research. So the idea is that you would just take those techniques and just move to the next thing. And, if a technique is working and you've got it dialed in for this muscle type, you could use it for another muscle type. But I think that I'm more teaching than research. If I had more success in research, not that I've just never been sort of my main drive. It may move more in that direction. If I really figured out everything in there, then I would be one of the sponsors for this program, and I wouldn't be speaking to you right now, and we'd just be laughing about this somewhere else. So I think that's sort of ways too. No, I think you would you would just keep going. I think that's what really happens to the people that love it and see great success, especially if there's something that can be done and it really does help people. But and of course, you can always work that into the way that you share how you understand knowledge with other people.
Next month, I'm doing a virtual event on the microbiome of humans and kind of like how that impacts sort of like your gut health. So we want to do kind of an oral microbiome and then like a gut microbiome kind of series of presentations. So Andy, I guess like does sort of like gut microbiome impact sort of like what you're seeing in your research?
It can, and gut microbiome is there's incredible things that they're figuring out, that the crosstalk between the nervous system of the gut and the nervous system of the brain. Very often it's some things that the bacteria in the gut are offering that's doing that. I mean, that's an incredible hotbed of research. In terms of it would be something that would help maybe predict why some people do have motility issues, why some of this constipation might take place, and how the agents and how the chemicals that the gut microbiome are offering that aren't typical, how they are affecting the motility. In our lab, there are people that are doing work with different kinds of fatty acids that are only produced by bacteria that we really don't take in diet all that much, and how they control motility by the same sort of things that I was doing. And it would be by the same sort of experimental design. You look at pieces of it, you watch how it affects that sort of thing. But that'll be a fascinating one for people to talk about.
Curious to know if I kind of like if your microbiome gets like off, right, and like that causes you to have like malabsorption and things run through you, for lack of a better term. I don't know, Andy, does that then impact kind of like how you're passing things and how your muscles are able to contract?
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. Because it's going to affect the neural system of the gut. And then they even have sort of like effectively, I guess the easier way to describe it is sort of like a poop transplant, where you can take, fecal matter from someone who is, a healthy sort of microbiome and put it into someone who doesn't, to try to get the right bacteria up. And like Katie was saying, these kids that take these antibiotics, you've tipped the microbiome into the wrong direction, and it's angry, and it's making things, and it's making gas, and it's contributing more to these problems, which is why the whole probiotic argument with taking the yogurt. But oh yeah, because that different population that you're not expecting is lighting up different things and all these neural pathways and preventing the proper sort of motility sort of program to run through.
Awesome. Speaking, I love the presentation. So interesting.